ends up being, we're just kind of translating English language stories. Like, oh, we're just trying to provide education to members of Congress. Crypto media is kind of like being like a war zone correspondent.
Welcome to Beyond the Beat, a podcast by Chain Story, the agency to elevate your status in crypto. I'm your host, Pedro, and every week we'll be talking to the people in crypto media. We'll be telling their stories, their failures, their lessons, and whatever tips or tricks they've got up their sleeve.
Welcome, everyone, to a special crossover episode of Brazil Crypto Report, a podcast that covers the digital asset industry in Brazil and LATAM, and Beyond the Beat, a show focusing on all things crypto media. So my name is Aaron Stanley of Brazil Crypto Report.
And I'm Pedro Solimano of Beyond the Beat and The Defiant. And yeah, super excited to see how this crossover episode goes. No idea how it's going to go, what we're going to talk about. But yeah, pretty excited to sort of join in these two forces and see how we go.
Yeah, so very cool. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on the show, and it was a pleasure to be on your show as well. And Pedro and I are also on the board of directors of the ACJR, which is the Association for Crypto Journalists and Researchers. Kind of a mouthful, but it's an organization that's basically all about promoting crypto media and researchers and trying to provide tools for people who are in this space. And we have Latin America connections as well. Pedro's from Chile. I'm kind of have my Brazil connections. So, Pedro, why don't you tell us a bit more about like just the Beyond the Beat podcast? Tell us a bit more about what you do at Defiant as well. Because I know that's kind of your day job, and you're kind of knee deep in all things Defiant land.
Yeah. So full time at the Defiant at the moment for the first time in like 10 years has been because I used to be a freelancer, 100% freelancer, and just this year I started full time, which has been an interesting development in my personal career. I cover, so my beat is actually mainly Bitcoin. They joke around because the Defiant is, as the name suggests, very DeFi heavy. Cami, who's the editor-in-chief there, Cami Russo, she wrote the book, The Infinite Machine. She's the founder of the Defiant, and she's all about Ethereum, and they joke around that I'm the Bitcoin reporter there. So I cover, a lot of, Ordinals has been a bit of my Trojan horse to get more Bitcoin stuff covered there. But I also cover all things in DeFi, regulation. We have been trying to put more of a focus on Latin America, things happening around here. And I'm keen to talk to you about how you view the media or what gets built here and all that sort of stuff. Beyond the Beat is something that just came up. It was something that I thought about when I was just starting writing a couple years ago, just to like better understand the world of journalism, the world of media, all that sort of stuff. And I had sort of shelved it until the current financiers of the project Chain Story, which is a PR agency, they came to me and they're like, hey, we've got this idea in mind, and it aligned really nicely with what I was thinking. And we sort of joined forces. And the idea is essentially to talk to journalists, editors, writers in the space about their beat, what they're covering, the stories behind their stories, why they're journalists, and then just like take a step back and like remove sort of their individual things, but go for what the media is doing, how we can fix it, what's wrong, what's right, traditional media, crypto media, all that sort of stuff. That's a TLDR, unless that was in fact too long.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting, and I've listened to a few of your episodes, and I found it pretty interesting. Just kind of, it's like a micro niche, right? It's like within media, it's like crypto media is its own thing, right? There's media, and then there's crypto media, right? Like crypto media is kind of like being like a war zone correspondent, right? And it's like being the like you're often like Syria or something during the ISIS times. Or, it's like you kind of end up with this like PTSD sometimes from covering.
You're always in the trenches. It feels
yeah,
like
you're definitely
always in the trenches.
Yeah, so it's like it's a different kind of it's not like you're like, oh, I'm the energy reporter at the New York Times or something. I'm just gonna write about whatever ExxonMobil's doing today, or it's like it's totally different vibe, I guess. So
yeah, it's funny because like I got into journalism through crypto. And so this is the only like way of reporting that I know. And I was chatting to a few friends who are reporters not inside crypto, and like the degree with which we have to understand like a complex topic immediately and like talk to people and understand that everybody is trying to scam us and everybody is trying to rug us and everybody is trying to like market something in a different way is, I feel like he's like, they were like, man, you're getting battle tested, that when you get out into like the other journalistic world, you're not going to know what to do with all this stuff because it might be a little bit more laid back, or you might not need, like, it's just going to be a different, completely different style of reporting. And I don't know if like, I love if you could also tell me a little bit about your history and if that's something that you felt along the way as well.
Yeah, well, I came from more of a mainstream media background. So I was with Financial Times for a few years in Washington, D.C. And then that's how I first found out about Bitcoin, really, in about 2013, I think, is when I wrote my first article about Bitcoin. I actually had a friend who, at the time, she was like a high-ranking congressional staffer, and she had quit her job to go be the communications director at the Bitcoin Foundation, if anybody remembers that from back in the day. The short-lived Bitcoin Foundation. And I was kind of like, well, that's a weird career change. Like, why would you do that? And she kind of, took some time, explained it to me. I was like, oh, that's interesting enough, right? So wrote a couple stories about it. It ended up getting back into crypto in like 2016-ish when I actually did a story about the Bitcoin ETFs with the Winklevoss Twins. So I interviewed the Winklevoss Twins, and to their credit, they actually like kind of red-pilled me, right? They spent a lot of time it was Tyler Winklevoss specifically, like spent probably like 90 minutes on the phone with me, just explaining like their whole thesis about why Bitcoin's better than gold and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, this is actually like, I this image in my mind of the Winklevoss Twins as, these kind of like Harvard meathead guys, right? They just kind of got lucky on some tech stuff with Facebook or whatever. But I was like, wow, like these guys actually like really did their homework on this. And it's pretty convincing. Right. So, and then from there, it kind of just like people saw this article that I'd written. I think it came out in probably like late 2016, and CoinDesk saw the article, and then I'm talking with them. They're like, "Hey, can you write an article about this ICO?" I'm like, "What the heck's an ICO?" And then
so you went from ETFs to ICOs.
Yeah, well, it's just kind of like I mean, I think at that point in time there weren't many people like writing about crypto. Like if you're CoinDesk, like you're looking for people who can write about crypto, and there's just like not that many people out there that were like approaching this from a journalistic vantage point, I guess. So I was like, okay, like there seems to be interest here. So, and then so I spent like 2017 with CoinDesk as kind of a full-time freelancer. Did a startup gig after that. Ended up going back to CoinDesk, and was ended up doing more work on like the Consensus event side, so doing all the event programming for Consensus and the content production there. Still sort of editorial, but like not like on the the day-to-day news beat, I guess. So that's kind of been my experience. Is like I came in, I've kind of come into this from like from the mainstream media perspective. And I mean, my interest in when I was in the mainstream media, I was always kind of like looking for like, what are like the new things that people aren't paying attention to that they should be. Like I wasn't really into the DC scene because it was too much of just like, oh, this is what Donald Trump said today kind of stuff, right? You're just doing a lot of just regurgitating what other people write, or just competing for like micro scoops about, like some congressman said this, and like some congressman no one's ever heard of is like proposing a new bill or something, right? And it's kind of like pointless, right? So I was always looking for stuff that's like, what's stuff that people should be paying attention to that they're not, right? And once Bitcoin came along after the Winklevoss thing, it was like, okay, like I should probably pay. This is probably going to be an important thing in the future in some form or another, right? And then once you kind of get sucked in the rabbit hole, it's like you can't really get out. That's that's like that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when did you make that transition, and how was that transition from like mainstream media into crypto media?
Yeah, so it was really 2017. Really was when I kind of became like a full-time crypto person. Really focusing on, like, I had a few other clients as well that were non-crypto, but like most of my energy was focused on crypto. probably like 80%, 90% of my energy was focusing on just crypto stuff at that point. And the industry was still like young enough then where you could actually like get access to people, right? Like you could just email people and they would respond to you. It wasn't. There's a little bit of like skepticism. You still had a lot of like the really kind of like hardcore Bitcoiner people that were, it was still pretty tribalistic, right? Coming out of like the block size wars and all that kind of stuff. And there was like a lot of learning you had to do just to get up to speed with where the industry was in 2017. There was like just a lot of study you had to put in. But that was kind of like, once I got into that, I was like, okay, I feel like this is a niche that I should just camp out on and really try to apply myself to more. And it just seemed like, okay, this is not something that's going to be like going away anytime soon, right? And I guess at that point, I was also in Washington D.C. at that point too, and there started to be a lot more interest in the regulatory agencies and in Congress and stuff. There's a lot more congressional hearings, like about crypto, and frankly, like we haven't really made that much progress on the regulatory front or on like the congressional front, which is kind of absurd. Like you have people like running around DC nowadays saying like, oh, we're just trying to provide education to members of Congress, and people are like wondering what this stuff. I'm like, guys, you've been there for like 8 years doing that. Like, like this isn't new. So, but it's a process. I get it. It takes a while, but it's just like, okay, like I've heard all this stuff. It's like Groundhog's Day, it's like that movie. You're just, it's like the same thing over and over and over again. But
so when did you decide to take so you were at CoinDesk for 2017, and then what were the moves for the next like 7 years that eventually took you to taking such an interest in Latin America that you moved to Brazil?
Yeah, so I was back with CoinDesk again. I did 2018. I joined a startup that didn't really pan out so well. Ended up going back to CoinDesk, spent about 3 years there doing consensus, like programming work, essentially like guiding all the content for that, which was really fun. But it was like just kind of like this massive undertaking. I don't think people realize just like the sheer amount of sausage making that goes into these things. But it was fun. It was fun, but it was a little like overwhelming. And I actually spent in the first half of 2021 during the bull market, actually, the big bull market we had that year. I was actually living in Brazil because of COVID. Like we were, the schools were all closed back in the US. So my wife and I were like, my wife's Brazilian. So like, we were just like, hey, let's just go down to Brazil. Like we can work remote. Like, let's just go. And then, so I was working for CoinDesk during that time, doing Consensus 2021, virtually. But I was just doing the whole thing from Brazil. And I ended up just deciding like, hey, I want to learn more about what's happening in the market here in Brazil. Like it's a huge market. Like there's 200 million people, big country. Like who are the main players here? And like, I couldn't really find any kind of English language resource on really anything that's going on here. Who are the players? It was just like, I met a couple people, but it was very difficult. So I was like, maybe there's an interesting like niche for like a micro platform on just focusing on like crypto in like Brazil and perhaps Latin America more broadly. So that summer I just spun up this Brazil crypto report platform, or newsletter, just kind of on a whim, just to see what would happen. And it's one of those things where people keep reading it. And so it's like, okay, maybe there's something here. So I just kind of continued to, yeah. So it's kind of like continued to nurse it, and it's like, 5-10 hour a week side project, I guess, for me at this stage. But, I've started doing podcasting, started trying to do, be more present at events and things, and just spending more time in the country locally with the community here and just getting to know people. So that's been really interesting because I've had to kind of like create my own a brand from scratch here, right? Because in crypto, like back when I was in the US, like, or, I was at CoinDesk, it's like, I wasn't like a big shot or anything, but people kind of knew who I was, right? Like, I was like reasonably well known in the industry. Like I could, get to most people if I needed to. But like coming here, people are like, who is this guy? Like this like random like gringo guy writing about Brazil. Like I've had to kind of like reconstruct my image from like nothing, right? Which is
do you
kind
speak
of
Portuguese?
I do, yeah. So that helps a lot,
Okay.
right? That helps a lot.
Yeah.
So like I'm not just like a tourist. Like I can, I can speak the language, and I can, I've done, I can do like panels and interviews in Portuguese and stuff. So that helps. And that gives a lot of credibility too with the locals, because they see like, okay, this guy isn't just a tourist. Like he's actually making an effort here to connect with like the local community. So so that's been interesting. It's been an interesting ride. It's been doing this for about 3 years now. And then I also have my day job. I'm at the Filecoin Foundation as well. So like I host our podcast there. Like I do a bunch of other content, community work there. So doing kind of a mixture of things here, but I've always wanted to experiment with like kind of like an independent media platform. I guess like, I think 2021 was kind of the era where like, it was like the current thing was like everyone's just launching their own Substack newsletters. Right. So I wanted to like experiment with something that was, like what am I going to write about that, like, people would actually pay attention to or be interested in reading about. Right. So
do you think that the age of like the Substack newsletter is still a thing? Like because I think about it sometimes, like now you've got other stuff that have popped up, like you've got Beehive, or you've got like not necessarily Substack as a platform, but I also think that there's an inherent sort of concern that I have that unless you have like a massive following, these sort of independent media outlets like yourself, or I used to have a newsletter called La Cadena that was also like Latin American based, and it was in Spanish, and it was Substack and that sort of stuff. And I always found that one of the hardest things was like, well, number one, distribution, but then number two is just like, fighting against like these massive people with these massive brands, and just like, because Substack isn't really optimized, I suppose, for helping like the little guy get discovered and move on out, unless you really put in the effort of like cross-platforming and just like everyday writing and just like having a very clear message. I don't know how you sort of, if you agree, or you got 3 years down the line.
It's basically impossible. not to be discouraging, but it's basically impossible to support yourself like financially. We'll put it that way. Like if you're doing it as a hobby, like as a side hobby, it's actually a nice tool. Even though I think things like Beehive are frankly vastly like out competing Substack in terms of new features and shipping new features and stuff like that. And but it's Substack's great. It's like it doesn't cost anything unless you're activating paid subscriptions. It doesn't cost anything, so that's easy, and it's pretty plug and play. But as far as like discoverability, it is difficult, right? You have like a lot of problems with like, aside from just like the recommendation engine that they have, which is kind of helpful if you can get other people to recommend your newsletter. Like that's how I get a lot of my subscribers now, is just from recommendations from other newsletters. But as far as like monetization of I think Substack was pitching this dream to creators of like, oh, you can support yourself financially by just creating your own content and selling subscriptions. Like maybe for like the 0.1% of like your Barry Weiss's and like these people, like sure, like but like, or like Pomp, right? Like Anthony Pompliano, right? He was kind of like the original like crypto Substack guy. Like I'm sure he's got 250K subscriptions and they're all paying him $100 a year, and he's doing pretty good. But for like your average Substacker, like for your average independent creator, it's basically impossible, sadly. So I think it's I don't know. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that same subject.
Yeah, I mean, I got really frustrated while I was doing mine because of that exact same thing. Because I was like, all right, I felt I was adding value, and I felt like I was doing something interesting, but then I was constantly running up against like financing issues and like discoverability issues. And I do think that the Latin American market is slightly different than the English speaking market, especially when it comes to like actual funding independent journalists or independent content creators. And so, I found it was really hard, and it was just like a slugging week after week. And I did it I think I put a newsletter out for something like 160 weeks straight, something like that, like without ever missing a week. And then at one point I was like, I need a fucking break. And just because, like, I don't know, it was really, because you also go into it with like the dream of being able to do this, monetize it, and being able for this to be your job, like respond to no one, write about the stuff that you find interesting or that you think needs to be written on, like have this like 1,000 true fans that constantly are like asking for more information and stuff from you. And then you can obviously like branch out into AMAs or podcasts or like do stuff with your community or your readers and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it was and I think this responds to like the broader sort of theme of the internet, where we just like eventually everything just coalesces or it just like converges into like these massive accounts. And then it just becomes really tough for the little guy to like come out. And then we have like we're really good at highlighting the ones that make it out that sort of feed into the ones that haven't, so that they can believe they can make it out. And I'm not saying they can't, like not at all. I'm just saying that you need to really put in the reps and really do the time, and just like, and maybe you won't make it for a bunch of things that are like outside of your written qualities or your researching qualities or the people you have on or anything like that. And I know this sounds like really doomsday for like Substack writers.
Don't start your own newsletter, whatever you do.
Yeah.
Any takeaway from that? One takeaway from the podcast.
If there is a takeaway, like one of the takeaways is that I'm on the board of the ACJR with you. I'm working at the Defiant full time. I've got Beyond the Beat, and then I've got a few other side projects. And that's entirely because I started writing a Substack newsletter. Like that's how I got my voice out. That's how I created my quote unquote personal brand. But like the road there was tough, and the road there was really different than what I expected. So I'm just saying, like, if you think that writing a Substack newsletter today is going to like, you're going to become like the Pomps of the world or the Barry Weiss or the Caitlin Johnstons or all those, who knows what's going to come.
Yeah. That's kind of what I've been telling people as well. Is just think of having your own newsletter as just your own personal brand building tool. And it's a loss leader effectively. Like if you can make enough money just to like pay for your expenses, like that's a win. But the exposure you get and the brand building opportunity you get opens up a lot of interesting new doors that, like I'm getting hit up all the time for various things that I don't have time to actually do, but like I have a lot of people like inquiring about stuff. But it does open a lot of doors for like both like relationships and like new potential business opportunities. And I think in this day and age, there is a lot of value in just having your own brand, right? Like I feel like I spent so much of my career trying to build up the brands of like the publications I was writing for, like Financial Times or CoinDesk, but I wasn't really like focusing on trying to build up my own brand. And then once you leave like CoinDesk, it's kind of like it's like when you're working at like the Defiant or when you're working at CoinDesk, you can just show up and you're like, oh, I'm with CoinDesk, and people are like, oh, wow, okay. But if you just show up and like, oh, I'm Aaron Stanley, people are like, well, who the heck are you, right? So it's like it does help having that kind of name like attached to your name, right? But when you're not working at CoinDesk anymore, it's like, okay, I'm just like who's this guy, right? So it is helpful to have like your own brand that you can, it's like self-custodied crypto. Like you can kind of take it with you wherever you go, right? You're not linked to one, your brand isn't linked to like one particular publication or something like that. So it's definitely worthwhile, but I think people just have to be realistic about like you're not going to, like, if you can make enough money just to like cover your costs doing this sort of thing, like that's a pretty good outcome.
Do you think that anybody like living and working in I guess we work in crypto, so I'll keep it there, but should have a brand or should be building their brand? Because I get a lot of questions about exactly this, and this is something that I was thinking about as like Beyond the Beat started becoming a thing in my mind and started like becoming a thing in the world, was like, am I just like, does the crypto industry need another podcast, another newsletter, and then eventually, I guess, ballooning it out into like another sort of personal brand?
I guess the short answer is probably no. But like a lot of crypto is just people going out of people's podcasts and starting their own newsletters at this point. So it's kind of like, I do feel like we have kind of reached, I mean, it's not to discourage people from doing it, but I think there is like, if you could find like the right niche, right? I think like you found an interesting niche with kind of the media play. I mean, you had a niche earlier doing Spanish language coverage. I have my niche doing kind of Brazil, Latin America coverage. Like if you can find the right niche, because like if you look at like most of the major like quote unquote successful crypto newsletters, a lot of this stuff is just like general market, like here's what's going on in the market today type stuff, right? It's like kind of news aggregation. They do it in some kind like Milk Road type stuff, right? And like I have nothing against Milk Road. I don't find their newsletter terribly compelling, but like it's a lot of it's just kind of like Me Too, like like just regurgitating other stuff that other people have like written, basically, right? In like a more fun way that's more appealing to like millennials or whatever, right? Then it's like a lot of your successful crypto newsletters, they'll have like subscribers in the tens of thousands, or just kind of like that, right? And it's not really providing any like new information. It's just kind of packaging things in maybe a little bit different way. And more power to them. I think there's room for that kind of stuff, but I don't think there's more room for more of those types of newsletters. Is maybe what I would say. But I think if you can find the right niche, right, like you're seeing a lot more like D-pin newsletters popping up now, and stuff like that, where it's like, okay, I think there's probably enough here to warrant having your own micro platform, or even like what like Will Foxley is doing with Block Space Media, where he's trying to create this as like a Bitcoin, like he's not trying to be Bitcoin magazine, right? But he's trying to be like a more kind of like, insidery, like kind of under the hood, like this is what's happening in the world of Bitcoin, from whether it's mining or whether it's ordinals or runes or like these other L2s or all these things. Just creating a media platform just focused on Bitcoin that's sort of a bit differentiated from Bitcoin Magazine, which I guess I view Bitcoin Magazine more as like an events company than like a media company at this point, just because, I mean, I don't know, like maybe I'm wrong in that assessment, but anyway, but like if you can find the right niche, I think it can work. But like you need to have the right niche, and you need to be good enough and know enough about that niche so that people will actually like care about you, I think is probably. But I think like I do think we are hitting this level of like kind of saturation with crypto podcasts and newsletters, where it's like, do we really need more of these things? And I think the answer is probably yes, if you can find the right niche for it. But at the same time, like if you're niching down, that like kind of shrinks your profitability and your audience, your potential audience, right? So it's like the opportunity is less appealing.
Yeah, I think of it sometimes as like the idea of what sort of information, not only what sort of information you're doing, but also how you're, like what you were saying before, how you're packaging it. Like, for example, something that I think about a lot is that like I watch a lot of podcasts, but outside of crypto. And I watch a lot of like comedy podcasts. And I feel like if we could start getting something more along those lines, or something a little bit more like satirical, or something more like parody, or something like that type, I feel like there's niches in the content, and then there's niches in the packaging, and like how you're actually like, because we can churn out the same information, but if you give it a funny twist, if you say it in a weird way, like, I don't know, I'm sure you know of Gwart from Twitter, who's also got his podcast now. But like he was saying things on Twitter, he was building himself on Twitter as like giving a really funny take on things that we were probably all thinking about, but he just twisted the way of how he was like actually portraying it. And I feel like that's a really interesting way to also move forward. And I feel like that's something I think about it a lot, like with press releases. So obviously, like we get like drowning in press releases all the time. And I was chatting to a friend of mine the other day about press releases, and he was telling me about like back in the day, Michael Jordan, when he just came back to like basketball, his press release was 2 words, "I'm back." And he's like, and that's a press release, and that's like, you're just saying everything. Obviously it's Michael Jordan, and like there's a huge context.
Yeah. That was like the 90s equivalent of a meme, right? On Twitter.
Yeah. Exactly. But so I mean, like I feel like that's the way that I'm interested in seeing that sort of differentiation moving forward as well, from journalists as well, the way that they're covering news, or the way that they're making podcasts, or also like news outlets and the way that they're presenting stuff for the reader and for the listener and the audience. Because I do think that there's, I don't know, despite that we've been very doomsday in our conversation just now, like there's a desire for things that are a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit differently, like especially in something that pretends to be a lot more serious than it actually is. Like the media industry in crypto pretends to be a lot more serious when you actually look at like the events and the people that are in it. And it's, I don't know, it's like a circus, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like we this industry isn't something that is necessarily ready to be taken super seriously, right? I mean, it wasn't 5 years ago. It was. I don't necessarily think it is today. So basically, what you're saying is like we need more shit posting just in like podcast format.
I mean, I think that we need more shit posting and podcasting format. Yeah, I appreciate you putting it out there just so bluntly like that. But yeah, I mean, I feel like you can, because like you jump on all these podcasts and they're all so fucking serious and they're all just like, and you get like people who are funny and interesting and weird and wacky, and then they just like get serious. And I think to myself, why not just keep a little bit more of that panache and that weirdness and that sort of vibe? Like, I don't know. I was a big fan of like, I don't know if they're still going anymore, but like Up Only with Kobe and I don't remember what his co-host was, but they had a really funny way of like talking about stuff, and then at least Kobe did. And I feel like that's something that I'm missing. But maybe I'm just not looking for it.
What about the Bad Crypto podcast? Is that still around? Remember those guys, the Bad Crypto?
I don't think so. I don't think they're still around, but maybe they've dropped off my radar.
Okay. Yeah. Those guys were kind of, I feel like they were trying to do they were kind of like the Dave Portnoy's of crypto, right? They're trying to be, or like they're trying to kind of be like, hey, we're these cool kind of like, you know, still we're like in our 40s, but we're still kind of in our adolescent years, you know, emotionally, and we're just going to kind of be like bros and like high five each other and like slap each other in the ass and talk about crypto, and like that was kind of like their vibe, right? And it played like there's a certain segment of the population, like kind of the mainstream people that are just kind of like wondering what this is or whatever. It's like the ESPN crowd, but that are like interested in like crypto, you know, like the Sports Center crowd. But anyway, like that was kind of an interesting experiment. I thought. I mean, I didn't find it very personally appealing, obviously, as you can tell, probably. But I thought it was kind of an interesting experiment on like, okay, let's presenting this content maybe a more like just kind of like funny and like loose way. But
yeah, I want to get your takes though on something that like being in Latin America. I was chatting to, I don't know if you know Saul Hudson. He runs a PR firm, Angle 42. He's a good friend. And he used to be the lead for, I think it's Latin America. I'm sorry, Saul, because you might listen to this and I'm going to get this completely wrong, but for Reuters in Latin America. And he was talking about like how much power he had, not himself personally, but like he had as a part of a news organization being in Latin America, keeping in mind this was Reuters and everything like that. But how do you see that as like something that like the Brazil crypto LATAM ecosystem can, or your report can become one day? Do you think that, or I'd also love to hear like, I guess that's a question. And then how is the audience? Is it like a Brazil native English speaker, or are you catering to people outside of Brazil who want to know what's going on in Brazil for both investment opportunities, for migration opportunities, for application opportunities?
Yeah, so my main audience is, I mean, I try to write for more of like the gringo crowd, right? I try to make it the content a bit more kind of gringo friendly. But most of my readers, most of my audience is actually Brazilian people, which is kind of interesting. So now it's not what I expected when I started, but probably about 80% of my subscribers, I have about something like 6,000 subscribers now to the newsletter across like LinkedIn and Substack, and like probably about 80% of them are Brazilian people. So I wasn't expecting that, but I get a lot of people that just say like your newsletter, your podcast is just the best source of information. So which I do appreciate. I don't think like the Substack culture hasn't really like taken off here in maybe ways that it has elsewhere. I mean, you do have some interesting like new media platforms here. You have kind of like it's this thing called The News, which is sort of like the Brazilian version of Morning Brew, which is like a newsletter product. Like their only product is newsletters, and that's kind of taken off. But I think generally here, people definitely, especially like gringo media, like foreign media, people take that stuff really seriously. So like, like Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Reuters, like any of these, like whatever these guys say about Brazil, like that's sort of like what, or just Latin American generally, like that's what people outside will perceive, right? That they perceive that as the truth, right? So I think people are here very concerned about like what I guess the kind of the gringo crowd thinks about them and how they're perceived among the gringo crowd. And even still amongst like the local language newspapers too. Like you have like in Brazil, you have like Valor Econômico, which is kind of the Wall Street Journal of Brazil, and they actually have a full-time crypto reporter, believe it or not, who's quite good. But like if stuff gets published in Valor Econômico, it's like, wow, like this is like gospel, right? This is like this is like heyday. So there you do have a lot of like people here, like there is that still that there is that premium on like mainstream media stuff, but you do have some like crypto media publications that have popped up here that are doing pretty good. Like you have like Cointelegraph Brazil, and you have Portal do Bitcoin and some other things that do a good job of covering stuff locally. But a lot of the media that I see across Latin America, a lot of the crypto media I see that's kind of focusing more on like the local audiences really ends up being, we're just kind of translating English language stories and put into like Spanish or Portuguese, right? It's just like, or it's kind of very elementary, like Bitcoin 101 type stuff. I don't really see a whole lot of like really kind of in-depth reporting or journalism or anything outside of a handful of outlets. Unfortunately, a lot of it's just kind of like, they're translating, articles that they see in CoinDesk or news that they see somewhere else, and they're just kind of translating that to the local language. And there's a market for that kind of stuff. It's not to say that's not like that's not legitimate or not good, but it's not, maybe there's not really the depth there that I think there could be. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's just sort of how I've been seeing this. But I do agree with what your friend was saying, is that as a like the foreign correspondence here, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a foreign correspondent. I'm just like a guy with a newsletter. I'm not really a foreign correspondent, but but like people do care about how things are, how gringos view them here. It's a very kind of sensitive topic, right?
Do you think like Latin America, I mean, I know the answer to like part of the question, which is like Latin America is getting underserved in just the general media industry. But then do you think why do you think that is? Is it a language barrier? Is it because, I mean, everybody always talks about Latin America as being like the next, or not the next, but it is like the place for crypto, or it is becoming the place for crypto. Like Brazil's market is insanely huge. You've got Mexico. I'm in Argentina right now, and things are like really like simmering here, but then nobody reports on it. And then you have like, so you've got like Crypto Noticias, Diario Bitcoin, Crypto Tendencias, and then you've got like a few scattering of like some other like, yeah, newsletters or podcasts or things like that, but like actual news outlets. And then you've got Cointelegraph in Espanol, and then you've got, I don't know, not even at the Defiant, and Cami is Chilean and I'm Chilean. We don't write anything in Spanish, But why do you think that is? I know I went on like a little bit of a loop there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, you do have, with like CoinDesk. I mean, they had somebody in Argentina for a while. I think they actually just rehired him, Andres Engler. I think they just rehired him maybe like a month or two ago. He's basically, they do actually have a full-time person in Latin America now, which is good. And the Block used to have somebody in Latin America as well. She actually works for me now part-time, so I scooped her up. She's in Colombia. But yeah, it's, I think a lot of it is a lot of the, I mean, look, like a lot of the stories that get clicks in crypto media are like price price related, right? You know, I mean, when I was at CoinDesk, we used to have this like debate all the time about, you know, it's like, we need to do this like big feature on this new enterprise blockchain thing. That sounds interesting. And then, you know, it gets like 100 clicks or something. But then meanwhile, the Dogecoin price story gets like 10,000, right? So there's always kind of this, you know.
Yeah, that's a bane of our existence.
yeah, exactly. I think at one point in 2021, I think like half of the traffic to CoinDesk was just like the Dogecoin price page, which was insane.
Savage.
But anyway, so I think some of it is that. I think some of it is, you know, a lot of this stuff just isn't that well understood outside the region. I think a lot of, and I think to some extent, like, I don't know how many like crypto people, I think, you know, crypto people love saying that they're like, they care about financial inclusion and all that stuff. But like my cynical position is like, I don't think people like actually care about that stuff. I think they just say that because it sounds better than I care about getting rich. So, you know, I mean, hate me if you want, but I don't think that's that like off. So I think as we get to the point where a lot of these tools are becoming more prominent and maybe becoming more like, there's more like just like real life impact and stories to be told here. I think you'll start seeing more coverage of Latin America. I mean, I think even in just the new chain analysis report that came out, the geography of crypto index, I think there's like 4 LATAM countries in the top 15 now, which is massive. So I think we'll start getting more, but it just feels like it's this kind of terra incognita, right? To where like the most of the energy of crypto is. And it feels like a lot of the exchanges that have been setting up here, I mean, like OKX and Coinbase and stuff, it's like they believe in the market, but they're not like viewing this as like, hey, we're going to get like we're going to make tons of money by operating in Brazil. You know, it's like they're profit centers. So their money making engine is like a totally different client base than Brazilian retail clients, for example. So I think that might be part of. I mean, I feel like that's part of the issue. I don't know. Can I turn that question back on you? I mean, I feel like you're from Chile. Like, I mean, you confess like your own publication doesn't even really write about this stuff that much. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think like Latin America is just like too much of a long-term play, and like despite at least Bitcoiners saying that they're all about like lowering time horizons and that stuff, I just don't think that when it comes to the media, I think it's a completely different ball game. And it like to start reporting on Latin America would require like a shift in priorities and in incentives and that sort of stuff. I actually think that there is a lot of money going around in Latin America, even if it's only concentrated in like small pockets or anything like that. And so like if people wanted to learn more about it and they thought to themselves, or they wanted to like come and invest or anything, and they wanted to do it, I do think that there is money, and there's a big tech industry, and there's a lot of stuff happening. Like a lot of people don't know this, but like Chile it's considered like we're very outside foreign investment friendly. We're very tech friendly. It's considered like a test net country for like bigger markets like Colombia, like Mexico. And so there's a lot of like startups that come here. They try out things here, and then they move on to broader markets. And so, yeah, I think that also there's a language thing that's a big barrier. And I think that's why what you're doing is really important, because it helps sort of bridge that gap. I do think that having like foreign correspondents living in Latin America, and for their beat to be specifically Latin America, and I think for journalists to start pressuring at their like jobs that they need to be reporting on more in Latin America is also something that we should be doing in English and in Spanish and in other languages. But yeah, I still think that, like you were saying, it's a sort of like Latin America is still a dark horse. You know, it's still like America's backyard. Not many people know what's going on. It's very institutionally unstable. There's like, I'm not sure what the metrics are for like digitalization or anything like that. That said, there's a lot of opportunity. but I just feel like the media has a different incentive structure at the end of the day. And I think and I'm going to beat this point again. I think that's also because journalists aren't doing a good enough job of pressuring their editors or whoever, boards or whatever it is, to be like, yo, we need to have reporters here. Like, I'm in Argentina right now, and the stuff that's happening in Argentina is happening at breakneck speed. It's involving authorities, local communities. You reported on it, so you know like what's going on. And I don't know of barely any of my journalist colleagues or anybody else who's reporting it at all, or if there's anybody thinking about sending people here. Like the person that you just said, Andres from CoinDesk, is news to me, but yeah, there's like Decrypt, I don't think has done anything. The Block has done anything. Like Fortune has done anything. Even like the Latin American media outlets haven't done that much or reporting or anything like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, I would argue that like what's happening in Argentina right now with this like a left city, and I've done a couple of podcasts on this, and I've at least tried to highlight it wherever I can. I mean, I would argue this is probably the most interesting thing happening in crypto, like anywhere in the world right now.
100%.
And because you do have this confluence of like of builders, of a crypto native community, of not just locals, but like gringos who are coming in as well to be part of this community. And you also have this kind of this weird like zeitgeisty moment in the Argentine political system where like Milei's not really like, he hasn't really come out being like pro crypto, but like his ethos is kind of broadly aligned with that of crypto, and he's pro innovation, and and it's like there's this kind of this weird window of opportunity that exists. So I think what's happening there is like, from what I've seen, that's the most interesting thing really anywhere. And I agree, like, everyone's just at Singapore and Token 2049 right now, just like partying it up. But, like, all right, like, sure. But I mean, if you even go back and look at the Chainalysis Geography of Crypto report just came out, or at least the index, like their rankings. And if you look at like, the top 15 countries, it's like, like Vietnam, Pakistan, Indonesia, these LATAM countries. And, when was the last time you saw anybody in crypto talk about any of these countries, right? Like it seems like there's a total disconnect between, the Western crypto industry that we kind of live and breathe and we work in, and then like the people who are actually using this stuff around the world. Like there's like a total disconnect. I wouldn't even know if you just dropped me in Indonesia, like I wouldn't know the first thing about crypto in Indonesia, even though it's like the fourth largest market in the world, according to Chainalysis, or the fourth highest adoption rate, according to Chainalysis. So I think some of these problems you're describing with like, why aren't people paying more attention to what's happening in Latin America? I feel like that's happening kind of everywhere, right? Like in all these countries, like Nigeria. I mean, you hear some stuff out of Nigeria, but it's mainly just because like that Binance guy got kidnapped by the government and he's sadly rotting away in prison. But that's like all you hear about Nigeria. And then these other places, like who knows, right? So, but I get it.
Do you think the media is complicit in that, or it's just a matter of?
Well, I think look, like crypto media has gotten really hemorrhaged lately. Like there's been layoffs all over the place, right? Like, CoinDesk, I mean, they went through like 2-3 rounds of layoffs. The Block, I mean, they've had their issues. Decrypt, I honestly don't even really know how Decrypt is. I mean, no disrespect to Decrypt, but like, I don't really understand what their business model is. Blockworks seems to be like, maybe the most like sustainable business model, but they're just really bad at like timing their events. So like they always time their events like to compete against Token 2049 and stuff. So like it feels like everyone's kind of like chosen their niche, right? And like you have limited resources, so it's like, okay, we're going to focus on this niche, and that niche is not necessarily like covering the geography, like crypto at a global scale, like geographically. It's more of like, we're going to cover like who's raising funds, or we're going to try to focus on institutions, or we're going to try to, like at CoinDesk, we were really, I mean, one of the reasons I left CoinDesk back in the day was just I got a little frustrated with, we were trying to kind of pivot this to becoming like a boomer TradFi kind of thing that I didn't find terribly interesting. It's like, it seemed like at that point in time, that's where the money was going to come from, was like, okay, the financial advisor community is going to be sending their, clients into crypto and whatnot. And it was just kind of like, okay, like that's the focus is like TradFi investors basically, who are interested in this asset class and whatnot. So it just didn't seem like there was the appetite for the kind of the real world stories of how these things are being used, or how these technologies are being used elsewhere. So I think, yes, they are kind of complicit, but I also think that there's a lot of external forces that there's a lot of resource limitations in the crypto media that, I think were unforeseen if you go back to 2021. Like no one was expecting that we're going to go through this like 3-year hemorrhaging period, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's a gripe I have. Like, people filling their mouths with decentralization and financial inclusion and that sort of stuff, and then when it's time to like, do or like actual report on it, or like, I don't know, invest in those areas or anything like that, it just gets tossed out the window. And so that's why I'm always,
it's kind of like it's like a cognitive dissonance thing, right? Like you can't like maintain these two separate ideas in your head simultaneously. So it's like at some point you have to kind of face the reality of it. But I'm interested. Just we have like 5 minutes left here, but would be really interested in just hearing from you a bit more about like kind of what your plans are in the future. I know you've kind of like have your hands in a bunch of different projects at the moment, but would love to just learn a bit more about like how are you planning to be like continually involved, especially in like the Latin America scene.
Good question, because it's a question that I ask myself all the time. I'm planning on staying at all my jobs. So everybody who's listening to me right now, whether I'm planning on staying there. I do plan actually on moving here. I'm in Buenos Aires at the moment, and I do plan on moving here and like embracing the moment that is happening here, because I agree with you that I think it is the most exciting thing that's happening in crypto in the world at the moment. There's a couple pop-up cities that are happening around the world. There's another one in Thailand. There's one that's happening I think it's in the US, that's similar to what went down here. But I think this has got like the right conditions to be the like a really interesting sort of moment or an inflection point for Argentina, for just crypto in general. And I do think that it's being massively underreported. And I just want to be here, at least for the beginning, to sort of live through it. So I plan on being here. I do want to do a little bit more like on the ground reporting. So maybe like travel around the region a little bit more, find out what's going on, see what's happening in different places, chat to other people, that sort of stuff. I'd like to be somebody who sort of shines a broader light in Latin America in general, and sort of bridges the sort of gap between like English speakers, Spanish speakers. I lived in the US when I was a kid. That's why I have this American accent, in case anybody was wondering, even though I am Chilean. And so I do see, like, not as like a lofty sort of like bridge of sorts, but I do want to sort of connect a little bit those two worlds. And so, I just, put in my little grain of salt and trying to like tell people. I think that there's a sort of two-side job that we do. One is like from the outside, we trying to report on what's happening on the ground here, and to like maintaining that sort of connection to the outer world, because we're quite isolated. At least like Chile is really isolated. And like we think that we know everything that's going on, and we have no idea what's going on. It's it's a funny sort of characteristics of Chileans. And then I think on the other hand, it's like trying to get more people to sort of come here, whether that's just users, whether that's tourists, whether that's like enthusiasts, whether that's investors, however it is. I'm not saying that I'm going to be like responsible for investors coming here, but I think that we all play a little bit of a role in what's going to happen. And so, I think that's the sort of next steps for me. And I'm going to flip that question on you as well.
I'm continuing to spend a decent amount of time here in Brazil specifically over the coming years. So hoping to continue this project and And yeah, I mean, for me, this is just kind of a side project. So I'm just kind of doing this in my spare time as a hobby, really, and as kind of a public service. But yeah, it's like my focus is just on trying to grow the ecosystem. So like whatever I can do to help support and if like, I always get excited when like a new gringo signs up for my newsletter. It's like, oh yes, I evangelized one more person. That's good. So, I think that's it's kind of like a one, it's like one brick in the wall at a time, right? Like you just got to kind of keep plowing away. So I think, yeah, I mean, I'll probably keep doing this. I'd like to keep doing this as long as I can. It's kind of like look, I've been doing this too long to just stop at this point, right? It's gotten some nice traction out of it, and it's been pretty beneficial for me. And I've enjoyed doing it and got a lot of fulfillment out of it. So, but hoping that, and if we get a new cycle here coming up next year, which I guess the experts say we will, I think markets like Brazil and like Argentina are going to start becoming really leaders globally, and I want to help kind of make that push, right? I want people to know this, and so yeah, so we'll see where I end up, but I like doing it and I want to keep doing it, but I'm not sure if it'll be like less, more, the same. I'm not entirely sure yet, but we'll find out soon enough, I suppose. Well, anyways, we are out of time here, but Pedro, how can folks find you? Well, if you want to find me, I'm usually on like LinkedIn. Probably shouldn't find me on Twitter because I'm technically illegal, or I'm technically banned from using Twitter right now.
How are you?
Well, in Brazil, it's like the whole thing. There's this whole Elon Musk versus Brazil.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I technically can't be on Twitter, so don't find me there. But like I'm on LinkedIn and some other places. But Pedro, what's the best way to find you?
Yeah, best way to find me. I am in a country that still accepts Twitter. So at El Pedro Solimano, ELPEDROSOLIMANO. That's a mouthful. It's just my name and L, like, how in Latin America we put on those masculine and feminine articles in front of words. And then, yeah, at The Defiant, you can find me. I'm writing there. Beyond the Beat on YouTube. There's also a LinkedIn, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I'd say that those are the main places. And Aaron, thank you so much. This has been a great crossover. I hope that we did well. I had a lot of fun, at least. I hope you did. So it was a good first experiment in future crossovers, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your time, Pedro. And yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in.
Have a good one, everyone.